weekend, Miss Georgia and I had the opportunity to do our first actual vintage farmhouse market. And one of the questions that we were asked most after the oohs and the ahs with our aprons and adorable little home decor was to tell them the story of Miss Georgia and how, you know, how it ever came to be. And I actually love sharing the story of Miss Georgia. Whenever people come to visit, I always love to sit down. It's the first thing I want to do is tell them about all the things in the house and also the story of Miss Georgia. One of the things that I would have to say is that Miss Georgia is the absolute storybook fairy tale of having a dream, believing in a dream, and making your dream come true. So I'm going to revert back to when I was about 6 or 7 years old, when I was in elementary school. And when we went to school, there was a little old white shack on the corner. And I always loved the shack. I was always intrigued with what, you know, the old guy that lived in there. And he never had any power, so you always seen his, you know, his fire smoke coming out of his chimney and that. And I always used to tell my parents and that one day I was going to own that old house. And so, you know, let's forward a little bit through the years. And as I grew up, it was still one of my dreams to own the old house. And life happened and I got married and moved away. But every time I'd come back to Merritt, I still always drove by and, you know, it was a really strong pull to just go and just see what was happening at the old house. So then my husband and I moved back to Merritt and we bought an acreage, and it was like, okay, now it was really strong because now I really dreamed of owning it, and I had the opportunity to actually figure out how I could move Miss Georgia to my property. So about 18 years ago, we went by, and the old guy that owned the property had passed away, and he had willed it to a family friend, and we were driving by and there was a yard sale there, and I mean, I just freaked out. My sister basically probably, you know, stopped the cars behind us because I had to get into that yard sale. And I went in and I bought almost everything I could, knowing that one day it was going to go back in the old house. He never had any running water, but he did have little cabinets in his kitchen. I bought that. He did have an old tub. I bought that. I bought buckets. I bought pails, all kinds of things, knowing that one day they were going to make their way back to that house. So then I was still on my, the smaller acreage, and I still had dreams of moving the house, but not really a concrete plan. And then my husband and I were fortunate enough to move to a larger acreage, and that's where it all really started. I got sick, and one of the things that I needed to do to make myself better, actually, I had a bipolar breakdown, and I knew that I could not make my way back without something stronger. So I actually hired one of Jack Canfield, who is Chicken Soup for the Soul. I actually hired one of his life coaches, and you had to write down 100 goals. And you may think that it's really hard to write down 100 goals, but it really isn't. If you sit down and actually think, if there was no limit to anything, what you wanted. And so I wrote down my 100 goals, and I had 3 goals at the very top. One of them was to own Miss Georgia, and she wasn't named that. One of them was to own the old house, and the other one was to own my own paint company. So now friends owned the old house, and I thought, okay, maybe I could go over and I could will this to happen. With the universe, you dream, you believe, and you will receive. And I believed strongly. I was collecting things all the time to go back in the old house. So I used to go in, I asked permission, and they said, absolutely. I used to go in, and I would just sit and just place things in my head and make it my own. And because I could make it my own, the universe would then make it mine. So I would sit there for hours. One Christmas I even went over and I actually put a Christmas tree in the window. It was probably the only Christmas tree had ever been in there. But one day when I was over there, I was sweeping the floor, and you know, as you follow Miss Georgia, you'll see that there's a wooden floor. It was all covered in lino, and I was sweeping the floor, and there was this beautiful black wood underneath. So I went outside and I got a shovel, And I mean, I was fully confident this house was going to be mine, and it was okay that I did all this. So I went in, I got a shovel, and I scraped all the tile off the floor, and it looked fabulous. So then I went home, and I had another group at that time, and it was called Junkin' Around. And I had a lot of following from different places in the world, and I posted on my page that I was over at the old house today, and this is what I had done. And it was, you know, not long after, I had a call from a woman down in the bottom of the United States that said, I seen what you did with that old house, and I would like to send you the paint to paint that old house. So that they sent me the paint. I opened it. I said to my sister, wow, this is our paint line. So I called them. I asked if I could sell their paint, and that was the beginning of my furniture painting career. I've now moved on and got my own brand. But from the old house, in the middle of a little tiny piece of property in Merritt, British Columbia, all the way down to the bottom of the United States, my dream of owning my own paint company came true. That was one. So then I decided it was time to implement the plan and move the old house. So I started asking around, and my husband said, no way. My dad said, no way. They were not helping me move another house. The house I live in now, I bought from an auction and moved it. They said they were not going to help me move an old house. So I didn't listen to them. I was going to move it. I was going to move it. So my dad said to me, Lori, how about if we make a deal? He said, I'll hire an engineer, and if the engineer comes and says we can move the house, we will help you move the house. They really believed that we couldn't move it. So we went over, we hired an engineer, we went over, the engineer was in up in the attic, and the engineer was under the house and everything, and he came out and he said, no way, you cannot move the old house. It won't stand it. So it was funny because I got in the truck and we were driving out of the driveway, and my dad looked at me and he said, you heard what he said? And I said, yeah. And he said, and I said, we're going to move the house. So I went home and I started just again dreaming, believing. And one day I was standing with a girlfriend of mine, and I was talking about the house, and her husband said, what are you talking about? You want to move it? I said, yeah, I want to move this old house on Lernacle. And he said, well, then let's move it. And I said, let's go. So we got in the vehicles and we drove out, and he walked around it and he said, let's move it. And I said, okay, now the main concern that main challenge that we have is that the house is higher and we have to get on the power lines. He said, that's fine, we'll cut the roof off. Okay, we can cut the roof off. And then we went around the back, and in Miss Georgia's little kitchen area, it was an add-on. And he said, this may not work. And so he said, we'll cut it off, then we'll put it back on. So, okay. So now I go home and I say to my dad, found a plan, we're going to move the old house. I say to my husband, made a plan, we're going to move the old house. My husband owns big semi-trucks, so all we have to do is figure out how we can put the house on the back of the semi-trucks. Not a problem. My husband always says in Lori land, nothing is a problem. So we make the plan, we rent a huge crane, and we go over and we move the house. We lift it up in 3 parts. Roof comes off, front porch, back porch comes off, and base of the house comes off. Onto 3 trucks, away we go, moving down the highway. Now, it's not a far highway, and I just had to go, oh, I got my grandma's glasses caught in my apron. And we just had to go across a major highway and then onto a little subsidiary or whatever, secondary highway. So we get that going, we bring it home, and we put the base down, then we took off and we put the back porch down, and then it came time to putting the roof on. And the guy that was running the crane said, now this is key. This is D-Day or whatever. And he lifted it up in the air, no ropes, no strings, nothing, on the crane, over to the top. And I knew it. I just looked up and I just said, thank you. Because I knew that that roof was going to sit down exactly where it should. We didn't get this far to fail. It went on, and from that moment, it's history. There's a lot of things about Georgia that you're going to learn as we go along. There's a lot of stories and a lot of really cool things that we have a lot of exciting things happening in Georgia. I'm going to leave you with one more little thing about Georgia and the power of the bond that her and I have. When I got her home, I thought she needed a name because she was strong. And she had weathered, and I just, right off the bat, Mississippi came to mind. And I've never been to Mississippi, so I don't even know if it's really logical. But anyways, Mississippi came to mind, and I thought, Georgia, she looks like a Georgia. So from that moment on, she was branded as Miss Georgia. She is known all over the world as Miss Georgia. And one day I was talking to the lady that owned her, and she said to me, Lori, what is Georgia that you're always talking about? What does that have to do with the old house? And I said, that's her name. And the lady said to me, do you know what the guy's name was that owned the house? And I said, no. And she said his name was George. So I hope that you follow along, and there's a lot of other stories, and just follow along as my journey goes forward with Georgia. We would love to have you join us for tea, on the porch, in the kitchen, whatever. We'll be doing videos, some live videos, some videos, pictures as we go. Have a wonderful day, and thank you very much for taking the time to join me at Miss Georgia.